There's a 2-year time window in retirement planning that most people don't know exists. And by the time they find out about it, it's usually already too late. It sits right before you turn 65. And what makes it different than any other window in retirement is what's not there yet. No Social Security decision locked in yet, no Medicare premium set, no IRMA look back damage, no mandatory distributions that you didn't ask for. Every major income decision is still entirely yours to make. But the moment that window closes, the system starts talking back. Your Social Security decisions are set, or the delay costs start mounting. Your Medicare premiums are set based on income you had from 2 years ago. R&Ds are on the horizon. The paths start locking in. I've worked with a lot of people who've used this window well, and others that didn't even know it existed until it had closed. But the difference in outcomes, in lifetime taxes, in Medicare costs, portfolio longevity, really is pretty significant. Today, I want to walk you through exactly what this window contains, what needs to happen inside of it, and the costs of letting it close before acting. And if at any point you want to see how this applies to your own situation, there's a link in the description. Feel free to book a call with my team and me. We look at this stuff every day. So to kick us off, let's start with a hypothetical example. Let's say that we have Thomas here, who's recently retired early at age 63. Thomas is doing pretty well. He has 1.5 million saved across a variety of accounts. He has $1.1 million saved in his IRA, $220,000 saved in a Roth IRA, and $180,000 saved in a taxable brokerage account. Thomas wants to spend $88,000 a year in retirement. He's expecting Social Security benefits when he turns 67 of $2,900 a month, and he doesn't have a pension. He owns a house, it's totally paid off, he doesn't have a mortgage against it. He's also getting his health coverage through his state marketplace exchange, the Affordable Care Act state exchange. Thomas knows that his retirement is going pretty well, but he has no idea that the next 2 years will have a bigger impact on his financial picture than the previous 10 did. Most people think that the big retirement decisions occur on a couple milestone ages: 62 for Social Security, 65 for Medicare, 73 for RMDs. What actually happens out there is the important time period starts 2 years before the actual milestone ages. Here's why. In the 2 years before the actual milestone ages, you have flexibility and control over what levers you're pulling in your retirement plan. For example, in Thomas's situation, he's 63 years old. He's on an Affordable Care Act marketplace exchange health plan. He can decide where to pull money out of to make up his income gap now, and those decisions are going to impact his taxes, which impacts the subsidies he'll get for that marketplace plan, which impacts his Medicare premium surcharges when he turns 65, which impacts the size of his portfolio down the road when he comes into the R&D ages 10 years from now. The moment he turns 65, some of those levers start to go away. His Medicare premiums are set in based on income he had from 2 years ago. The Social Security clock is becoming a little bit more urgent. R&Ds are on the way. The levers don't disappear, but they become significantly harder to pull. So there's a cascading effect. And when Thomas hits each of these milestone ages, that's when the system starts talking back to him, and the paths that he's set up for himself really start to get set in stone. So let's walk through Thomas's situation, knowing this cascading effect is going to impact him. So Thomas is 63. He's got 2 years until Medicare kicks in. He needs to spend $88,000 a year. Well, his initial plan is to take money out of his IRA to bring that $88,000 of spending money in. Every dollar that he takes out is taxable income to him. He's going to have to pay tax on the money that comes out. And in addition to those distributions, remember, he has a taxable brokerage account of about $180,000. That's going to produce some modest gains and dividends and interest. And because it's in a taxable brokerage account, he has to pay tax on all that stuff every single year. So when we run a tax projection based on all these numbers, his modified adjusted gross income, we'd expect to be around $130,000. So that after taxes and other costs and so forth, he's left with precisely $88,000 of income. Well, that modified adjusted gross income number impacts a couple different things. Number one, he's getting his health care right now through a state marketplace exchange. And if his income is above 400% of the federal poverty line, he's going to have to pay for 100% of the costs of that plan. If his income is less than 400% of the poverty line, the government will subsidize some or all of it through premium tax credits. So at $130,000 of modified adjusted gross income, Thomas is well above that 400% threshold and is going to have to pay for all of his health care for the next couple of years. And the other thing is that his income this year is going to actually impact what he'll pay for Medicare 2 years from now. And even though he's 2 years away from turning 65, remember that there's a 1 year lag in determining how much we have to pay for Medicare. The reason is that the more income that you have every single year, the more you have to pay for Medicare through these IRMAA surcharges. So Medicare wants to charge us for our health insurance starting on January 1st of every single year. And they need our income information from the previous year in order to do that. But we probably don't have our income information. We don't usually get our 1099s from the previous year until at least February, usually later than that even. And when we do, there are often corrections. Long story short, we don't have to file our taxes until April 15th. And that's the information that Medicare needs to determine what we pay for our premiums. So because of all this, there's a 1 year gap, meaning that the income that Thomas has this year is going to impact his Medicare premiums when he turns 65 and enrolls. So the real dollar impact on Thomas for having a modified adjusted gross income of about $130,000 is that he'll be paying the full rate for his healthcare plan for the next 2 years. The average cost for somebody of his age these days is about $1,200 a month. So he'll be paying all of that, $1,200 a month for the next 2 years. And if his income is $130,000, he'll have to pay an extra $96.60 a month for Medicare 2 years from now. So this 2 year window is important. It's more important than when he was in his earlier 60s, like age 60 and 61. Because in those ages, remember, Thomas just retired. While he was still working, he had less control over the levers of his income. He was working, he was getting paid for his work. He had less control over whether to dial it up or dial it down during those years. And he also has more control in this window than he will at age 66 or 67, because at that point, Social Security is probably going to be turned on for him. He has less levers to pull with regard to his taxable income on a year-to-year basis. So for Thomas, the first decision is what to do about this Medicare premium surcharge. His income from this year is going to impact what he pays for Medicare 2 years down the road. And his baseline plan of taking the money out of the IRA resulted in a modified adjusted gross income of about $130,000, which puts him in the first tier for these Medicare premium surcharges, otherwise known as IRMAA, or Income Related Monthly Adjusted Amount, IRMAA. He's actually not that far off from the second tier. If his modified adjusted gross income is about $7,000 higher than we projected, which could happen for any variety of unforeseen reasons, he'll actually find himself in the second tier and have to pay more than that $96.60 a month that we had previously reviewed. If it were me trying to figure this out and we realized that we're going to be $21,000 over the threshold, which puts us in this IRMAA surcharge territory, the first thing that I would look at is maybe reducing the IRA distributions and then making up the dollars that are not coming out of the IRA by distributions from one of the other accounts, probably the taxable account first. So if, for example, we take $25,000 less out of the IRA, that means that his taxable income will be $25,000 lower and theoretically be under that premium surcharge territory. It also means that he's going to have $25,000 less to spend, and we'll need to take it out of one of the other accounts to make up that difference. So it could come from the Roth, it could come from the taxable account, depending on the gains that we might have to pay in the taxable account to make up that $25,000 difference. The other thing that Thomas might be interested in are some kind of Roth conversions. He has $1.1 million in his traditional IRA. He's a little bit leery of the RMDs that are coming for him in about 10, 12 years when he gets into his mid-70s and has to start taking money out of the accounts. So he's interested in taking some of the money in his IRA, pushing it into his Roth IRA and paying tax on that conversion now as opposed to tax later when he has less flexibility and discretion. Well, the problem with that is there's this pull and push with regard to Roth conversions and Medicare premium surcharge. Roth conversions might be a great long-term idea, but they increase his tax profile. Every dollar that he converts adds to his taxable income. And if his modified adjusted gross income is already coming in above that premium surcharge threshold and in at $130,000 a year, well, if he converts $10,000 of his traditional IRA to his Roth, that's only going to increase his modified adjusted gross income by another $10,000 and bring him further above that premium surcharge threshold. And in fact, if he's at 140, that puts him in the second tier and he has to pay even more for Medicare. So what Thomas might think about here is, rather than taking any money out of his IRA in the first couple years, fund his $88,000 spending need by taking it out of the taxable account first. Again, he has $180,000 of assets in the taxable account. If he liquidates and sells everything, he might have some long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains that add to his tax bill a little bit in that year. But it's not every single dollar of that 180. So if he switches his distributions to come out of the taxable account instead of the traditional IRA, he's probably reducing his tax profile, and he could replace some of it, maybe up to that $109,000 modified adjusted gross income threshold, to where he avoids Medicare premium surcharges but still gets to take advantage of some of these Roth conversions. So let's get more specific in Thomas's case. He's got $180,000 in his taxable brokerage account. Let's assume that consists of $90,000 of basis. So what that means is, at some point, Thomas had $90,000 of cash. He used it to go buy a bunch of investments in a taxable account. So it could be stocks, bonds, mutual funds, ETFs, doesn't matter. Let's say that he built a diverse portfolio in a taxable brokerage account by spending $90,000. Then, over the course of more than 1 year, let's assume that this happened over an 8-year period maybe, that $90,000 grew in value and now it's worth $180,000. So for every dollar that he sells in that taxable brokerage account, half of it is gains and half of it is basis. He paid 90, it's worth 180. So if he sells everything, he's going to have $90,000 of long-term capital gains from growth. So what that means for him in this circumstance is, if he's taking money out of his IRA in order to spend $88,000 a year, well, in order to raise that $88,000 a year, he could not take anything out of his IRA and instead take it out of the taxable account by selling investments, half of which are going to trigger long-term taxable capital gains. So when we go this route instead and assume that Thomas takes money out of the taxable account to meet his spending needs instead of the IRA, net-net, our tax projection results in a modified adjusted gross income of about $54,000. So he's well below that Medicare surcharge threshold of $109,000 of modified adjusted gross income. So what that means by my math is, the threshold's here, he's all the way down here. If he makes that adjustment, he could convert to a Roth IRA up to about $55,000 and still remain under the Medicare premium surcharge threshold, to where when he turns 65, he's not going to need to pay that extra $96 a month or more. Now, realistically, we probably don't want to use every single penny up to that threshold. And the reason is that these are just projections and there's a margin for error. He might have a little bit more interest income in a savings account than he expected, or something else might happen that could put him over that threshold theoretically. So if I were in Thomas's shoes, I'd probably think about raising the money out of my taxable account instead of the IRA, and then maybe buffering that with some kind of Roth conversion. When I do the Roth conversion, I want to give myself at least $5,000 of room underneath that Medicare premium surcharge threshold, just as a margin for error. So the income-related monthly adjustment amount, IRMAA, this is the first lever, this is the first decision point. But it's tied closely to the second decision point, and combining the two is really where the value is. So the first two decisions here, number one, we want a distribution plan in light of these IRMAA surcharges in a way that minimizes our total cost for healthcare, both now and potentially after we turn 65, and could be subject to these Medicare premium surcharges. The second decision was, well, what do we do about these Roth conversions in the tax valley, right? These next 2 years are really pretty important because we're pre-Medicare. We might not have Social Security coming in yet. We have more wiggle room with regard to our tax planning. The third decision has to do with precisely that, the Social Security aspect of this. So a lot of people jump to the conclusion that, hey, I'm retired, I need to draw income from somewhere. Why don't I turn on my Social Security benefits now? Because that eases the pressure on my retirement accounts. I have to take less money out of my accounts to meet my spending needs. That can work in some circumstances, but we don't want to jump to that conclusion. The reason is that this 2-year window is prime tax planning opportunity time. And if we turn on the Social Security benefits, some of that income is going to be counted as taxable, and it gives us less wiggle room for our tax planning strategies. Either it raises our income to a point where we exceed the Medicare premium surcharge tiers, or it gives less room for us to Roth convert or take IRA distributions, or some combination of all this stuff. So the earlier we take Social Security, the shorter the window of opportunity for these tax planning things. So our Social Security benefit in this circumstance is $2,900 a month if we file at our full retirement age of 67. Well, as you might know, every month before your full retirement age that you file, you will be reducing permanently the amount of benefit that you'll be entitled to. So in this case, if Thomas files at age 63, right when he retires, yes, that means that he has to raise less money from other sources. He has Social Security coming in, which goes toward his $88,000 annual spending need. He simply has to take less money out of the accounts. But if he files at 63, his benefit's going to go down to $2,175 per month and eat into his tax planning window over this 2 to 4 year period. Now, he can also wait all the way up until age 70 to file. And every month that you wait, your benefit goes up. And in this case, that $2,900 monthly benefit at age 67 would go all the way up to $3,596 a month if he waits until age 70. So not only does your benefit go up, it leaves you more wiggle room for tax planning kinds of opportunities. So Thomas's Social Security decision has both short and long-term impacts here on his spending, on his income gap. Remember, he wants to spend $88,000 a year. So if he files right when he retires and collects $2,175 a month, that reduces his spending gap all the way down to about $5,158 per month over the course of the year. The issue is that his spending gap is going to stay there for the rest of his life because he's locking these benefits early. Now, if Thomas waits to file according to the initial plan until full retirement age, he'll be collecting $2,900 a month. If he's spending $88,000 a year, that's $7,333 per month. So that's precisely what his income gap would be over the next 4 years. That's what he would have to take out of his accounts to meet his spending needs. Then Social Security kicks in 4 years later. It's a little bit larger than if he were to file right now, and his income gap goes down from that point forward to $4,433 per month. And of course, if he waits until 70, he's got a full 7 years where he's going to have to pay all his expenses from distributions from his accounts. That income gap of $7,333 will persist for the next 7 years, but then he'll start collecting a benefit of $3,596 per month, reducing his income gap to $3,737 every month for the rest of his life. So for Thomas, his decision point comes down to a couple of different factors. Well, number one, if he's going to live a nice long life, the math favors waiting until at least full retirement age, maybe age 70. The math on this says that if you live until your mid-80s, you're maximizing the present value of your benefits by waiting until 70 to file, because you will be foregoing checks from the Social Security Administration you could be receiving for these first few years. But when they do start coming in, they're substantially larger. So how many of those larger checks do you need to collect to make up for these lost years initially? Well, the math says if you live into your mid-80s, you've collected enough of these larger checks to make it worthwhile for you. If Thomas doesn't think he's going to live quite that long, well, he might indeed want to file earlier. The fact of the matter is that the more he delays, the more wiggle room he's going to have with regard to his tax planning, but the larger his income gap will be in the early years, and the more pressure he's going to be putting on his portfolio. Long-term tax planning might favor waiting until 70, it might favor 67. We're not totally sure yet. What I can say is that if I were in Thomas's shoes, I'd probably look pretty hard at waiting to file for Social Security benefits until I was at least 67. I'd use this period before they turn on to do some tax planning stuff, and then when I got closer to 67, I'd probably reevaluate. This isn't a decision he needs to make at 63 that's set in stone 4 years later. He can make adjustments along the way, because at the end of the day, this is an ongoing process based on the rules, based on the tax laws, and that stuff is always kind of changing and evolving around us. So at this point, Social Security is being delayed, the tax valley is being used by some Roth conversions, and IRMA is being managed. The last decision in this window is the one that protects everything else. So the last decision here is how you're going to build your buffer before the window closes. The reason this is important is everybody needs both a cash reserve, an emergency fund, and a war chest as part of their portfolio. And once you get into Medicare, once Social Security is on, once mandatory distributions kick in, your ability to make adjustments with regard to portfolio composition goes down by a little bit. The reason has to do with his taxable assets. Remember, he put $90,000 into a taxable brokerage account. It doubled over the course of some years. Now it's worth $180,000. Well, he can't sell those positions and rebalance into other investment kind of stuff without triggering long-term capital gains. So if he wanted to raise cash, or if he wanted to reposition and buy some shorter-term bonds to build his war chest, that's probably going to come with a tax consequence. Now, of course, he could always make these changes in the Roth IRA or the traditional IRA, and transactions in those accounts are not going to trigger taxation to him. But the whole point of the war chest is to be there for a rainy day and allow his stocks time to recover if he needs. And he may not necessarily want to take money out of the Roth or out of the traditional IRA during one of those periods, because he's going down the path of meeting his spending needs by taking money out of the taxable account first. It might not be ideal to switch up the order just for the purpose of building his war chest. So let's say, for example, that Thomas decides he wants an emergency fund of 12 months worth of cash. What that means is he takes his total spending need over a 12-month window, which is $88,000, and he parks precisely that much in the bank. Now, the rules for an emergency fund are that the cash needs to be liquid and available to you at all times, no matter what, which means no CDs, no short, medium-term bonds. You don't want to lock that cash up. You need access to it for a rainy day, for an emergency, hence the name. We also want to make sure that that cash is insured by the FDIC. So if anything happens to the bank in which your account sits, the federal government has promised to come in and make you whole, just in a worst case scenario, which unfortunately has happened a little bit over the course of history. The third rule for our emergency fund is we want to make sure it's getting as much interest as you can possibly get out of that account. And unfortunately, a lot of savings accounts at big banks these days will pay you very, very little, maybe 0.01, 0.0% per year. Whereas other banks, you can easily find in this environment right now, 3% per year on your savings, again, in an FDIC insured vehicle that's liquid and available to you at all times. So step number one here, right, that for this decision point is, as Thomas is building his buffer, he needs an emergency fund first. 12 months worth of expenses is a pretty reasonable and middle of the ground amount of cash to keep on hand for a rainy day. Now, the second element in his buffer is the war chest. So let's set aside this concept of his cash reserve, of his emergency fund for a minute, and focus on what's in the portfolio. Remember, he has an IRA with about $1.1 million in it, a Roth IRA with about $220,000, and a taxable account with $180,000 in it, for a total of about $1.5 million. Well, he might want a diversified portfolio, which is what most reasonable people think about when they consider what to invest in inside of those accounts. So he probably wants some stocks, some big companies, small companies in the US and outside the US. He probably wants some bonds for diversification benefits. This is where the war chest comes into play. The stock part of his portfolio, of that $1.5 million, stocks are going to go up, stocks are going to go down. They're a somewhat volatile investment. That's precisely why we want the bonds in there, because we know that we will go through several bear markets over the course of our retirement. The stock market might crash. It is absolutely within reason that stock values could fall 30%, 40% or more for a little while before recovering. That's very commonly what happens in a bear market. That's why we want to rely on the bonds. We want to have some of our portfolio in bonds so that when it comes time for Thomas to take money out of the accounts, he has an option of selling assets that are a little bit more stable so that he can give his stocks more time to recover in a down market. What we don't want to do is invest a whole bunch of money in the portfolio in stocks when values are up here, and then have a bad stock market where values fall and have to sell them when the values are lower. We're trying to buy low and sell high, right? So the war chest part of this is, not only should Thomas have maybe 12 months worth of cash as part of his emergency fund, he probably needs some of his accounts in safer bonds in order to allow his stocks time to recover in a bad market. Ideally, maybe 3 or 4 years worth of living expenses in bonds. So if things really go bad in the investment markets, he has 1 year's worth of cash on hand, plus another 3 or 4 years of cash in somewhat safer vehicles being bonds. Now, bonds are not totally risk-free either, but they tend to be a little bit more stable than stocks. So if we use this logic for Thomas, let's say that on top of his 12-month emergency fund, the rest of his buffer is going to be a war chest in his portfolio of 4 years worth of expenses. We take $88,000, we multiply it by 4, we get $352,000. That's a little bit more than 23% of his portfolio. So what this implies in Thomas's case is he has the capacity, the latitude to allocate his portfolio up to maybe 75% stocks and 25% bonds, because since he has $1.5 million saved, the 25% represents more than 4 years worth of expenses, which is precisely where we want to arrive for his war chest. Now, if you're watching this and you're starting to realize how some of these pieces connect, the tax picture, the war chest and the buffer, the IRMA decisions, the tax value, the Roth conversions, the portfolio allocation. This is the kind of stuff my team and I do every single day, and we're happy to talk to you about your specific situation if you like. There's a link in the description of the video. Feel free to book a call with us. We do this stuff every single day. So let's put this whole window together for Thomas. Rather than taking everything out of the IRA first, finding himself in Medicare premium surcharge territory, dealing with RMDs down the road, he's instead decided to take the money out of his taxable account first. That creates more room in the few years when he's in this window. We've decided to fill some of that room under the Medicare premium surcharge threshold with Roth conversions of $50,000 a year. So now he's staying out of premium surcharge territory. He's mitigated his income gap because he's delayed filing for Social Security, reducing pressure on his portfolio, and he's used this window as an opportunity to set up his buffer by raising a little bit of cash in the bank accounts, 12 months of expenses, and then repositioning his portfolio around that to retain 75% of his investment accounts in longer-term growth and stocks and those kinds of asset classes, but still have 4 years worth of living expenses in bonds as his war chest in case the market nosedives tomorrow. When we incorporate all this into his long-term plan using some software for support, you can see that these strategies add about $775,000 to his ultimate portfolio size. That doesn't mean that Thomas might necessarily want to expire in his 90s with another $700,000 or $800,000 in his account. It simply gives him more options along the way. He can increase his gifting, he can spend a little bit more, he can take more vacations or more lavish trips or whatever he wants to spend money on. He simply has more options around the edges of his plan. It also increases the Monte Carlo chance of success, which is better interpreted as a chance of not having to make any changes. You can see with his initial plan, he was in pretty good shape. He had a 77% chance of success, but when we make these minor tweaks, not only does it increase the expected value of his portfolio long term, it increases his chance of long-term success, which is exactly what we're after. This window isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about using the last 2 years of full control to set up the next 30. Because during this window, during these 2 years, the system is still listening to you. And after it closes is when it starts talking back. So the bottom line is this: the last 2-year window before you turn 65 is your opportunity. IRMA hasn't set in. RMDs haven't set in. The tax valley is still open. You have levers that you can pull during this window that start to disappear after you turn 65. If you miss this window, you spend your retirement reacting to decisions that you didn't even know you were making. So use this window of opportunity to your long-term advantage. Thomas used it, and by doing so, as we could just see, he created more portfolio longevity, which simply gives him more options along the way. He managed his taxes a little bit better. He's paying less for Medicare over the course of his life. He's really putting himself up for a lot of long-term future financial success. Now, what we often see from people who are in this window right now is that if they're still working, they're often still maximizing their contributions to the traditional 401k at work. And that seems reasonable on the surface, right? That was the tactic that helped them build wealth, got them to the position to where they're pretty close to retirement. Well, it can actually be detrimental once you get into this window. Now, I walk through exactly why that is and what you might be able to do instead in this next video right here that we'll queue up. I would suggest watching that one next.